Why did no one see it coming? The bridge had always looked like nothing more than steel and bolts stretched across a canyon. But that night, under torrential rain, it became a coffin suspended between two worlds. The storm raged like it wanted to tear the earth apart, thunder shaking the mountains, lightning splitting the sky into jagged white scars. 8 Navy SEALs pressed themselves against the trembling guardrails, their rifles raised, their breath clouding in the freezing air. Enemy fighters poured in from both ends, shadows with guns, disciplined enough to move like water, unstoppable as a tide. More than 200 of them, far more than intelligence had warned about. Commander William Harrison clenched his radio in a white-knuckled grip, his voice breaking against static. No backup. No extraction. No way out. The bridge gave them nowhere to hide, no walls to press against, no escape except the 1,000-foot drop into blackness. Rain stung his face, washing blood from a cut above his brow. 20 years in special operations had taught him to recognize when death was already in the room. This was it. A young private whispered what everyone else was thinking. "This is our grave, sir." The words felt final. They hung between thunderclaps, heavier than the storm itself. Sergeant Scott Davidson checked his magazines with mechanical calm. 3 left. Not enough. His expression didn't change. He had always known his end would come in some dark corner of the world, unremembered by anyone but the men who fell beside him. Harrison tried to scan for options, but every angle collapsed into the same truth. Nothing but the canyon wall on one side, a deadly fall on the other, and enemy fighters boxing them in like hunters closing a trap. His night vision goggles caught the silhouette of a commander at the far end, tall, calm, raising his arm to signal the kill. 30 seconds, that's all the SEALs had left. Harrison thought of his wife, his son, of the years stolen in deserts and jungles, the letters written but never sent. He thought of the men crouched beside him, America's best, about to vanish in a storm that no one would remember. And then the crack. It was not just a shot. It was a sound that tore open the night itself. A Barrett .50 caliber rifle has a voice no soldier forgets. It is thunder inside thunder, the kind of roar that makes the world itself listen. Through his optics, Harrison saw it happen, the enemy commander's head snapping back with a violence that made the body collapse like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The raised arm went limp. His men froze. For one impossible second, silence. 200 fighters still as stone. 8 SEALs blinking in disbelief. Even the storm seemed to pause, caught off guard by a single bullet. Then chaos. Confusion rippled through enemy ranks. The storm roared back, but everything had shifted. One unseen shooter had tilted the balance of an entire battle. "Who the hell fired that?" Davidson whispered. "And from where?" Harrison had no answer. None of his men carried a rifle like that. No support sniper had been briefed. This was someone else, a ghost in the storm, someone who had just rewritten their fate. But that story didn't start on the bridge. It started 3 months earlier, far from the glamour of battle. At Forward Operating Base Horizon, a dusty fortress cut into the Afghan mountains. At dawn, the base was alive with routine. Boots pounded the gravel in cadence. Men shouted over engines. The metallic clang of weapons being cleaned filled the air. Among them, unseen, forgotten, worked a woman most of them never even noticed. Alexa Reyes. 5'2", 100 pounds soaking wet. Black hair cut short, eyes that always looked down instead of meeting anyone else's gaze. She wasn't a door kicker, not one of the loud ones. She stacked boxes, logged medical supplies, inventoried ammunition. She served meals in the mess hall. She was the logistics girl. Invisible, forgettable, essential only in ways no one respected. She moved with quiet precision, hands quick, every note in her clipboard exact. To most, she was just another support staffer who made sure gauze and beans arrived on time. To some, She was a convenient target for mockery. "Hey, Doc Lady," Sergeant Scott Davidson called one morning, leaning against the doorway of the supply room. His 6-foot frame blocked the light, smirk spreading across his face. 3 other SEALs followed, laughing even before the joke came. "You get those rifle kits I asked for, or are you still trying to figure out how to read?" The men chuckled, harsh and cold. "Yes, Sergeant," Alexa said softly. She slid a box across the counter, her eyes fixed on her clipboard. "Well, would you look at that," Davidson muttered with exaggerated wonder. "She actually got something right." He turned to his team. "Mark the calendar, boys. Might not happen again." More laughter. Alexa kept her face still, calm, unbothered. Inside, her pen pressed against the paper, jotting a tiny note in the margin of her inventory sheet. Davidson favors right side, blinks before firing, hesitates half-second trigger delay. No one noticed. No one cared. No one thought the quiet supply clerk was studying them with the same precision she gave every crate of bullets. That night she sat alone at the edge of the mess hall, eating in silence, watching the SEALs across the room. Each glance lasted less than a second, just long enough to record another detail. The base treated her like furniture, but she was always watching. Then came the old Marine. Frank Miller was 68, skin like leather, hair clipped down to gray stubble, voice graveled from decades of shouting through desert dust. He was the kind of man who had lived too long to care about politics or pleasantries. He sat across from her one evening, uninvited, tray thudding on the table. "Mind some company, Reyes?" Her eyes flickered up. "No, Gunny, not at all." He nodded, chewing with slow patience. Then, "Saw Davidson giving you grief again. That boy's got more mouth than brains." "It doesn't bother me," she murmured. Miller studied her, eyes sharp as knives. "No," he said after a moment, "I don't believe it does." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "17th time you've asked for combat team assignment. 17th time denied." Her fork paused just slightly. "Brass says you're too valuable here. Organizational skills, they call it. That's what they say when they've already decided where someone belongs." Alexa didn't flinch. "I understand the military's need for resource allocation." Miller chuckled, gravel in his throat. "That's a fancy way of saying you know they're full of it." Then his words shifted. "Your father would have had a few things to say about it." Her head snapped up. "You knew my father?" Miller nodded slowly. "Miguel Reyes, best shot I ever saw, Desert Storm, saved my life and the lives of 21 others, 5 miles out, 0 visibility, he found us anyway. Man did things with a rifle that didn't make sense." Alexa froze, the fork heavy in her hand. "He taught half the snipers who came through training back then. Never got the credit, didn't want it, but those of us who were there, we remember." Miller leaned back. "When I saw your name, I thought it had to be coincidence. Then I watched you, the way you move, the way you're never loud, never noticed, same as him." Silence fell between them. For the first time since she'd arrived at Horizon, Alexa felt something flicker inside her chest. Not anger, not frustration, something she had almost forgotten. "Hope." Miller finished his meal and stood. "Meet me at the armory tomorrow, 600. Got a shipment that needs organizing." His voice carried weight in that word, more than its surface meaning. He paused, his hand on the back of his chair. "Your father once told me, the most dangerous person in a fight isn't the one who shouts the loudest. It's the one nobody sees coming." Then he left her sitting there, heart pounding, the words of a dead man echoing through her like thunder in a storm. She looked down at her hands. They didn't shake, not anymore. For the first time since she'd arrived, she knew something the rest of the base didn't, something they couldn't guess. She wasn't invisible, she was waiting. And sooner or later they'd see. Why did she show up at 600 sharp when she could have stayed hidden? The armory at Forward Operating Base Horizon wasn't just a room of weapons. It was a cathedral of steel and silence. Walls lined with rifles and carbines, racks filled with machine guns and sidearms, rows of ammunition crates stacked like stone pillars. The air smelled of oil and metal, sharp and alive. When Alexa Reyes stepped inside, the door locked behind her with a final metallic clank. Gunnery Sergeant Frank Miller stood waiting with a steaming mug of black coffee. His pale blue eyes tracked her with the patience of someone who had already decided who she was long before she knew herself. "You're on time," he grunted, tapping a code into the keypad. "Good." He walked her past racks of weapons into a small back room. A map covered one wall, its surface littered with notes and markings. On the workbench lay tools arranged with obsessive precision. Miller set his coffee aside. "Your father saved my life February '91. Kuwait, highway of death. Shrapnel ripped me open. No medevac, no hope. Then Reyes shows up on comms 5 miles away, in a storm. Couldn't see 10 feet, but he found us. Dropped 17 men in 12 minutes. Saved 22 Marines. Saved me." His fingers brushed a scar that ran along his jaw. "He never asked for credit, never got it, but I'll never forget." Alexa listened, hands clasped behind her back, still as stone. Inside, though, her chest burned. Every word filled a hollow she'd carried for years since her father's death in Iraq. Miller opened a locker and pulled out a case. Metal clicked as he laid it on the bench. He unlatched it slowly, deliberately, like a priest opening a reliquary. Inside was a spotting scope, sleek, advanced, not standard issue. "This doesn't exist on inventory," Miller muttered. "Neither does this conversation." He slid the case toward her. She didn't reach for it, not yet. "Your old man understood something most shooters never learn. It's not about the weapon. It's about becoming invisible, even to your own side, especially to your own side." Finally, Alexa lifted the scope, the weight familiar, natural in her hands. Miller's voice softened, almost reverent. "The apple didn't fall far." He turned back to the map. "I've scheduled you for supply runs to outposts twice a week. Officially, you'll be dropping off rations. Unofficially, you'll be learning the terrain, observation points, vantage lines, all the places no one else pays attention to." Alexa nodded once. Miller's weathered face cracked with the faintest smile. "Your father used to say, the most important shot is the one nobody sees coming." "I remember," Alexa whispered. "I heard him say it once, thought he didn't know I was listening." For the first time, Miller looked at her not as a logistics clerk, but as something else entirely. A sniper's daughter. A shadow waiting for the right light. Night after night, Alexa divided her life into two worlds. By day, she was the quiet supply clerk who counted gauze and beans, ignored by everyone. By night, she became her father's daughter, studying maps, walking hidden paths, memorizing wind shifts across valleys, calculating bullet drop against invisible targets. She never fired the Barrett. The weapon was too loud, too distinct. But she cleaned it every night, assembled and disassembled it until her fingers could find each part in darkness. In her notebook, the one no one ever asked to see, she wrote down everything: patrol schedules, convoy movements, terrain shifts after storms. But she also recorded people. Commander Harrison favored his left knee. Davidson blinked before he fired. Private Johnson had sharp eyes but struggled with quick transitions. Each note small, each note hidden among inventory codes. The SEALs dismissed her, but she knew them better than they knew themselves. One night, she carried a tray of coffee into the Tactical Operations Center. Commander Harrison stood over a map of a place called the Long Bridge, a narrow steel structure stretched over a canyon shaped like a dragon. Back. 30 fighters, he said. Minimal weapons, a simple job. Alexa froze, coffee tray balanced in her hands. 30 didn't match the convoys she'd observed during her supply runs. The patterns were too big, too frequent. She knew it. She felt it. "Sir," she said softly. The room went still. Seal stared as though a ghost had spoken. Has the satellite imagery been updated in the last 72 hours? Harrison's eyes narrowed. Why? Because a dust storm hit 3 days ago. Recon would have been blind. Reports might not be accurate. The silence cut deeper than any words. Davidson smirked. Since when does the coffee girl do recon? Forget it, Harrison muttered. We deploy at 200, check your gear. Alexa backed out of the room, heat in her chest, her face calm but her pulse racing. She knew she'd crossed a line. She also knew she was right. Later that night, a knock at her door. Miller stepped inside, voice low. Harrison reported your little comment I covered for you. Told them you've been helping me track weather for supply convoys. But Reyes, he studied her face, serious, searching. The intel's wrong, isn't it? Alexa didn't hesitate. There's more than 30, much more. Miller sighed, rubbing his jaw. Command already approved the op. No one's listening now. Then history, about to repeat itself. He froze, the weight of memory flashing in his eyes. Desert storm. A unit surrounded. Miguel Reyes firing from nowhere. You're not your father, Miller said quietly. I know, Alexa answered, but I'm the one here now. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Miller reached into his pocket and handed her a small black device. Encrypted radio, secure, frequencies preset, convoy leaves at 100, driver owes me a favor, he won't ask questions if you ride along. Alexa closed her hand around it. Why? Because your father made a choice that saved me, because command sometimes gets it wrong, and because if I let you walk into this blind, he'd haunt me till the day I die. When Miller left, Alexa sat in silence, the radio heavy in her palm. She thought of her father's words. The final shot must be perfect. If she was wrong, it would cost her everything, her career, her freedom. If she was right and did nothing, 8 men would die. The choice wasn't hard. She began to pack. The convoy left under starlight, engines low, headlights off. The mountain air was sharp, dry, whispering across the ridges like an old secret. Alexa rode in the passenger seat, her medical supply pack heavy at her feet. Inside, broken into parts, the Barrett waited. The driver, Specialist Tours, smoked a cigarette at the wheel. He didn't ask questions until they were already an hour down the road. Never thought I'd drive Reyes, kid, through these mountains. Alexa turned to him, startled. My brother knew him. Fallujah, lost his legs, but he lived. Your dad pulled him out. Men like that, they don't come around often. He tapped his cigarette against the ashtray. Whatever you're doing out here, I don't want to know. Just tell me where to drop you. Ridge above the Western Valley, she said. I'll walk from there. Tours nodded, done. The truck rattled on, headlights still dark. Neither spoke again. Some silences carried more than words ever could. When the convoy halted for a maintenance check, Alexa slipped out into the shadows, unseen, unremarked. She began to climb. Rocks crumbled under her boots. The Barrett pressed heavy against her back. The climb tore at her muscles, stole her breath, but she didn't stop. She knew every handhold, every silent path. The mountain belonged to her as much as the desert had once belonged to her father. By dawn, she lay hidden among jagged boulders, scope raised, watching. And what she saw turned her blood cold. Not 30 fighters, not even close. Machine gun nests, RPG teams, snipers dug into caves, more than 200 men. An ambush waiting. A trap already sprung, only the SEALs hadn't walked into it yet. Alexa closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breathing, feeling the wind brush across her cheek. Her father's voice came back to her as if he were still alive, whispering across the years. The desert doesn't forgive weakness, but it respects patience. She opened her eyes again, watching the bridge, the canyon, the men waiting like wolves. And in the storm of her chest, her decision hardened into steel. If the SEALs walked into that death trap tonight, they would not be alone. Not this time. What do you do when the silence feels like a trap? Commander William Harrison raised his fist, signaling a halt at the eastern entrance of the Long Bridge. The storm had arrived earlier than predicted. Sheets of rain fell hard and fast. Lightning fractured the mountains. Thunder rolled through the canyon like artillery. 8 seals crouched low, their night vision goggles cutting green light through the dark. The bridge stretched before them, a narrow spine of steel and concrete suspended 300 feet above the abyss. It looked like a skeleton, fragile, untrustworthy, waiting to break. Something gnawed at Harrison's instincts. Years in combat had tuned him to danger, to patterns that didn't add up. His neck tingled, the same way it had before firefights that never made the news. Eyes sharp, he whispered into his comm. Davidson crouched beside him, rain dripping from his helmet. Visibility's trash, sir. I know that's not what's wrong. Harrison scanned the canyon walls. Too still, too clean. No patrols, no stragglers, not even the echo of distant voices. It wasn't absence, it was preparation. They're already in position, he muttered. And then the night exploded. Gunfire ripped across the bridge. Muzzle flashes bloomed from hidden caves, from both ends of the span, from nests dug into the canyon walls. The chatter of PKM machine guns shook the air, joined by the sharp crack of snipers firing from impossible angles. "Contact, contact," Harrison shouted. The SEALs scrambled for cover, but the bridge gave them almost nothing. Concrete barriers spaced too far apart, flimsy steel supports that sparked with every ricochet. Bullets hissed and whined, bouncing off metal, carving sparks into the storm. Private Davis went down first, a bullet tearing through his shoulder. His blood mixed with rainwater, running across the steel deck. Williams dragged him behind the nearest barrier, hands already pressing bandages against the wound. "How bad?" Harrison shouted. "Through and through. He'll live, but he's done." Harrison tried the radio. Nothing but static. Jammed, they'd known. The trap had been set with precision. Intelligence had failed them. 30 fighters, no, 200, and disciplined, trained. This was no rabble. This was a kill box. "Sir, what's the play?" Davidson barked, slamming a fresh magazine into his rifle. Harrison scanned his men. Johnson pressed against the rail, breathing hard, eyes wide. Thompson firing short bursts toward shadows he could barely see. Davidson steady, cold, efficient. And Davis, pale and bleeding out, the medic's hands slippery with rain and blood. They had minutes, maybe less. Lightning flashed, and in that brief white cut of light Harrison saw them all. His men, his brothers, his responsibility. And for the first time in his career, he didn't have an answer. 300 yards away, high on a ridge, Alexa Reyes lay prone behind her rifle. Through her spotting scope, she saw the slaughter unfolding exactly as she'd feared. The SEALs were trapped, outnumbered, outgunned, boxed in. She had been right about everything, the force size, the weapons, the ambush. But being right brought no pride, only dread. Rain streaked her face, soaking into her fatigues. Her fingers tightened around the Barrett's grip. Her eyes swept the battlefield. She wasn't looking for random fighters. She was searching for the head of the snake, the commander. And then she saw him. At the western end of the bridge, a tall figure in tactical black stood on a protected ledge, binoculars raised, his arm gesturing in calm authority. Even from this distance, his presence radiated command. Amir Zadran, high-value target, the man whose name whispered through intelligence briefings like a curse. The architect of bombings, the ghost who had eluded every attempt at capture. And here he was, directing an ambush against 8 Americans with all the patience of a man certain of victory. His hand lifted, ready to drop, ready to signal the final assault that would swallow the SEALs whole. Alexa adjusted her scope. The distance was 420 yards. The wind blew at 15 miles per hour from the northwest. Elevation difference, 80 feet. Humidity high, temperature dropping. Every variable mattered. Every second mattered more. One chance. One shot. She breathed deep. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. The final shot must be perfect. On the bridge, Private Johnson's voice cracked through the rain. "This is our grave, sir." Harrison closed his eyes. For half a second he surrendered. And then Alexa squeezed the trigger. The Barrett roared like thunder. The muzzle flash lit the rocks around her. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with brutal force. Through the scope she watched Zadran's head snap back. His body folded. His arm dropped. He toppled like a puppet cut free. For one heartbeat, silence. 200 fighters froze. 8 SEALs stopped firing. Even the storm seemed to draw breath. Then chaos erupted. Zadran's men faltered. Machine gunners hesitated. Snipers wavered. Coordination unraveled. The ambush cracked open, its spine broken by a single unseen bullet. On the bridge, Harrison lifted his head above the barrier, rain pouring down his face. "Who the hell fired that shot?" he whispered. Alexa didn't stop to celebrate. Her hands worked the bolt, chambering another round. Her breathing stayed steady, controlled. Her scope found a machine gun nest pinning the SEALs from the eastern approach. Range, 390 yards. Adjust. Fire. The nest went silent. Harrison saw it, eyes wide. Davidson, Thompson, eastern approach. Williams, get Davis moving. Johnson, cover fire, go. The SEALs surged into motion, their training taking over, muscle memory saving them where instinct had failed. They began a fighting withdrawal, using the sudden confusion to carve a path back toward the eastern side. And above them, Alexa's shots fell like thunderbolts. A truck exploded when her round pierced its fuel tank, lighting the canyon in an orange bloom. A sniper's cave went dark with a single precise hit. A mortar team collapsed before they could fire. Each shot deliberate, each shot perfect. Davidson counted under his breath as he reloaded. 10, 11, he stopped, shaking his head in disbelief. Every damn one hits. The ambush dissolved into panic. Fighters fled, weapons abandoned. Vehicles roared down narrow passes, engines screaming. Some tried to regroup, to rally against the phantom sniper, but it was too late. The storm had a ghost in its belly, and she was merciless. Harrison's comms remained silent, but his optics caught something. On the western ridge, a small figure methodically cleaned a rifle, as though what had just happened was nothing more than routine. His breath caught. "Is that Reyes?" Davidson followed his gaze. The supply clerk, no way. Lightning split the sky, illuminating her silhouette against the rocks. Small, alone, absolutely certain. Then movement, enemy fighters converging on her position. "Reyes is compromised," Harrison barked. "They've found her." Gunfire erupted on the ridge. Alexa darted from her hide, moving fast across treacherous terrain, pistol in hand. She fired back at her pursuers, each shot calculated to buy seconds of space. "Sir, we've got to help her," Davidson urged. Harrison didn't hesitate. "Williams, Davis, Johnson, hold position. Davidson, Thompson with me." They sprinted through the storm, boots slamming the steel bridge, hearts pounding with more than fear. It wasn't just duty, it was debt. The woman they had mocked, ignored, dismissed, she had just saved their lives. And now they would try to save hers. What do you owe to someone who just saved your life? Commander Harrison asked himself that question as his boots pounded the steel of the long bridge. Rain hammered down, bullets sparking off metal, but his eyes were fixed not on his men, not even on the enemy still regrouping in the canyon, but on the lone figure retreating across the ridge above. Reyes, the supply clerk, the woman he'd barely spoken to, who had always kept her head down, who seemed content to live unnoticed among the shadows of the base. And yet, in the space of 60 seconds, she had turned the impossible into survival. He had no right to ask for more. and yet he knew if he left her, she would die. "Sir," Davidson's voice cut through the storm, raw with urgency. "We don't have the manpower. She's on her own up there." But Harrison didn't slow. "We're not leaving her." Davidson cursed under his breath but followed, because that's what soldiers do. On the ridge, Alexa's lungs burned. She sprinted between jagged boulders, her rifle slung against her back, pistol raised, ears ringing with every shot fired behind her. The enemy had adapted. First confusion, then fear, now rage. 3 teams converged, herding her toward a dead-end ledge. She could feel the trap closing like jaws around her. But she didn't panic. Panic wasted seconds. Her father's voice threaded through her racing pulse. "The storm doesn't fear you. The storm doesn't care. You move anyway." She slid behind a boulder, rain slick against her cheek, breath shallow. 1 magazine left. 15 rounds. Enough to slow them, not stop them. A voice called out in accented English, amplified by the storm. "American, you cannot run, you cannot hide. Lay down your weapon." Alexa didn't move, didn't answer. She tilted her pistol skyward and fired a single round into the night. The crack echoed across the canyon, bold, defiant. The answer was gunfire. A spray of bullets carved chips of stone from her cover. Alexa ducked low, biting back the sting of rock fragments against her skin. Her pistol hand trembled for the first time, not from fear, from the weight of what she had done. She had broken the rules, disobeyed orders, killed a man who was supposed to be untouchable. And she knew, with chilling certainty, that even if she lived, she could never return to the invisibility she'd once accepted. She was visible now, to her enemies, to her allies, to herself. The SEALs pushed hard up a narrow goat trail, weapons raised, boots sliding on slick stone. Every corner promised an ambush. Every shadow could hold death. Davidson spat into the mud, voice sharp. "Sir, this is suicide. Half our team's still pinned on the bridge. We split, we die." Harrison didn't break stride. "You saw what she did, Sergeant. Without her, none of us would be breathing right now." Davidson's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. "And with her, we might not be breathing much longer." For once, Harrison didn't have a commander's calm answer. He only had instinct. An instinct screamed that leaving Reyes to die was more than tactical error. It was moral failure. He looked at Davidson, rain dripping from the brim of his helmet. "I won't abandon someone who didn't abandon us." That shut the argument down. Because in war, sometimes morality outweighed tactics, and both men knew it. Alexa moved again, darting across a gap, her boots skidding on wet rock. She dove behind another ledge, gasping. Her pistol was nearly empty now. She pressed her back against the stone, rain soaking her hair flat against her forehead. For the first time since the firefight began, her chest tightened with doubt. What if they don't make it? She forced herself to breathe, slow and steady, calming her racing pulse. Doubt was a luxury, regret another. She could not afford either. Footsteps approached. Voices barked orders in a language she didn't fully understand, but the meaning was clear. Flank her, corner her, end it. She raised her pistol, ready to fight until the last round, ready to die. And then a shadow moved where no enemy should be. A hand clamped over her shoulder. She spun, pistol raised, and found herself staring into Commander Harrison's eyes. "Easy," he rasped, his own rifle covering her flank. Davidson and Thompson appeared behind him, guns already cutting down the fighters approaching from the other side. Alexa froze. She hadn't expected them, not here, not for her. Harrison's voice was low but firm. "You're coming with us." The fight became chaos. SEALs and insurgents clashed in the rain, shadows flashing muzzle fire across the ridge. Davidson fired in controlled bursts, cursing between shots. Thompson covered the rear, his rifle carving arcs of light through the dark. Alexa reassembled the Barrett under fire, her hands moving with surgical precision. Bolt, barrel, magazine, scope. In less than 60 seconds, the rifle was whole again. She rolled onto her stomach, scope pressed to her eye. Rain blurred the lens, but her target was clear, a machine gun nest cutting off the SEAL's escape. She breathed, calm despite the storm. Squeezed the trigger. The nest erupted, 3 men falling like marionettes cut from strings. Davidson swore again, this time in awe. She's not just good, she's... Save it, Harrison snapped, firing another burst. But even as he spoke, a truth settled into all of them. Reyes wasn't their liability, she was their lifeline. The enemy pushed harder, unwilling to let their trap unravel. Bullets chewed into the rock, grenades arced through the rain, detonating with thunderous cracks. Alexa shifted position after every shot, never firing from the same place twice. Her father's lessons lived in her body: shoot, move, vanish. Never let them know where you are. The storm must be blind. But she wasn't blind. Her scope found everything: the mortar team setting up behind a ridge, the sniper adjusting his perch across the canyon, the RPG operator lining up a shot at Harrison's team. One by one, she silenced them. Still, the pressure mounted. For every fighter she dropped, 2 more pressed forward. Davidson's rifle clicked empty. He slammed in his last magazine, muttering, "Running dry here." Thompson was bleeding from a graze to his arm, teeth clenched against the pain. And Harrison felt the weight of command like a physical wound. If they stayed, they'd all die. If they left her, they might live. The choice was brutal. But before he could give the order, Reyes spoke. "Fall back," she said, her voice calm, steady. "I'll cover." "No," Harrison snapped. "Sir," she turned to him, her eyes sharp, unflinching. "If you stay, none of us get out. If you move now, you'll live. That's an order." He blinked, thrown. She wasn't his commander. She wasn't even his soldier. But in that moment, her authority was absolute. Because she was right. Harrison clenched his jaw, torn between duty and survival, pride and necessity. Then he gave the only answer he could. "Davidson, Thompson, get back to the bridge. I'll bring Reyes." "No," she said again, softer this time. "You can't carry both fights. Let me do this." Their eyes locked. Rain poured between them. In her gaze he saw no hesitation, no fear, only resolve. The kind of resolve he'd seen in men, ready to die for their country. The kind of resolve he'd never expected from the quiet woman in the supply room. And in that silence, he understood the truth. She wasn't asking for permission. She was giving him a chance. A chance to save his men. A chance to live. The SEALs began to retreat, their silhouettes vanishing into the rain. Harrison lingered one heartbeat longer, his hand gripping Reyes' shoulder. "You walk out of this," he said, voice rough. "That's an order." She gave the faintest nod. Then he turned and followed his men into the storm. Alexa adjusted her scope again, settling into the cold familiarity of her rifle. Her world narrowed to crosshairs, wind, breath. The noise of the battle faded into the rhythm of her heartbeat. One shot, then another, each one buying seconds, each one carving space for the SEALs to survive. The storm swallowed her whole. And for the first time, Alexa Reyes wasn't invisible. She was undeniable. How long can one person hold back a storm? Alexa Reyes lay prone behind her rifle, rain drenching her uniform until it clung like a second skin. Her world narrowed to the crosshairs. Nothing else mattered, not the cold biting into her bones, not the tremor in her hands, not the thunder splitting the sky above. Only the target. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, recoiling hard against her shoulder. A fighter dropped mid-sprint, his rifle tumbling into the mud. She shifted, adjusted, fired again. Another fell. Each shot bought seconds. Seconds the SEALs used to retreat across the bridge, dragging their wounded, fighting their way towards survival. But for every man Alexa silenced, 2 more surged forward. They moved with rage now, not precision. their leader's death still raw. Bullets carved the ridge around her, kicking up shards of stone, splinters biting into her cheek. She didn't flinch. Not yet. Because flinching was weakness, and weakness had no place here. Down below, Harrison's men stumbled through the storm, boots slipping on slick steel, blood mixing with rain in dark streaks across their gear. Davidson cursed as he fired blind, suppressive bursts over his shoulder. "Sir, she's not gonna make it." Harrison didn't answer, couldn't. His chest felt tight, every instinct torn in half. They had no choice but to keep moving, but each shot that echoed from the ridge, each impossible, perfect shot, told him she was still there, still holding, still giving them the chance she had promised. And with every shot, his guilt deepened. Alexa's breathing slowed, in, out, calm against chaos. Her father's lessons played in her mind like whispers against the storm. Don't chase the target. Let it walk into your sight. The bullet must meet the breath, not the other way around. She obeyed. Her chest rose, fell, she squeezed. Another shot rang out. Another fighter collapsed. But then came the click. Empty. She slid back, ejecting the magazine. 3 left. She shoved one in, slammed the bolt forward, rolled back into position. Her finger hovered over the trigger, then stopped. Because in the lull of reloading, in the heartbeat between shots, something cut through the storm. Not gunfire, not shouts. Her own heartbeat. Loud, relentless. And beneath it, the thought she had buried for years. Why am I really here? Not the official reasons, not the mission, not the seals, not even the flag stitched on her shoulder. The truth pressed against her like the weight of the canyon itself. She wasn't here because of duty. She was here because of him. Her father. The man who had raised her on stories of storms and silence, of patience and precision. The man who had died before she could ever prove she was more than his shadow. She wasn't saving these men for their sake. She was saving them for his. And that truth, raw, unshakable, nearly broke her. Gunfire dragged her back. She rolled to the side as bullets ripped through the stone where her head had been. A grenade clinked against rock, its metallic rattle louder than thunder. Alexa shoved herself up, sprinting across the ridge, diving behind another ledge as the explosion tore the air. The blast punched her chest, deafening, rocks pelting her back. She groaned, ribs screaming, ears ringing, but she moved anyway. Because stopping meant dying. She propped the rifle again, vision blurred. The world swam in rain and smoke. Her hands shook now not from fear but from exhaustion. She squeezed another round off, missed. Her jaw clenched, she reset, adjusted, breathed, fired again. Hit. But the miss haunted her. She couldn't afford misses. Her father never missed. The fighters closed in. She could hear their voices now, shouts carried over the storm. They knew she was alone. They could smell the end. One darted across an open stretch, too close for the Barrett. Alexa yanked her pistol from its holster, firing 3 times. 2 missed. 1 struck home. Her chest heaved, her vision narrowing. She was slowing. The storm was too big. And for the first time, she wondered if Davidson had been right, if this was suicide all along. On the bridge, Harrison stopped. "Sir," Davidson barked, "what are you doing? We have to move." Harrison stared back toward the ridge, toward the muzzle flashes still cutting through the night, toward the single figure holding off an army. He thought of every time he had dismissed her, every time he had failed to notice her, every time command had told her she wasn't combat material. And then he thought of now, of what she was doing for them, for him, for men who had never once given her respect. "She's buying us time," Harrison said quietly, "and we're spending it running." Davidson's eyes narrowed. "You want to go back?" Harrison didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because Davidson saw it in his face. The guilt, the gratitude, the unwillingness to let her sacrifice alone define the night. Alexa fired again, the recoil jolting through her sore muscles. 2 left. Her mind flickered a memory of sitting in the supply room, Davidson mocking her, the men laughing. She remembered biting her tongue, pretending not to care. And now those same men were alive because of her. The irony was bitter, the justice sharper still. But she didn't smile, didn't feel pride. Only wait. Because every bullet spent here was another moment of her life traded away, another piece of herself burned into the storm. And she wondered if anyone would even remember her name when it was over. A shot rang out, not hers. Pain ripped across her side. She gasped, rolling onto her back, clutching the wound. Warm blood seeped through her fingers, lost instantly in the rain. Her vision swam, the world tilted. For the first time, her hands shook uncontrollably. This is it, she thought. Her pistol slipped from her grasp. The Barrett felt impossibly heavy beside her. The storm roared. The enemy closed in, and Alexa Reyes lay bleeding, fatting, wondering if her father would be proud, or if she had simply chased his ghost into an early grave. She wanted to cry, but no tears came, only the rain. Only silence. And then voices. Not enemy shouts, not commands in a foreign tongue. American voices. Cover her. Gunfire erupted above her head, not hers. Footsteps thundered against the rocks. Harrison, Davidson, Thompson. They hadn't left. They came back. Through the haze of pain, Alexa saw them, rain-slick, bruised, exhausted but alive, firing into the storm around her. Davidson dropped an enemy fighter with a clean burst. Thompson dragged her behind cover, shouting in her ear, but she barely heard the words. Her chest shook with something she hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not safety. Something deeper. Recognition. She wasn't invisible anymore. They saw her. Really saw her. But the battle wasn't over. The storm still raged. The enemy still pressed. And Alexa, bleeding but conscious, forced her hand back onto the Barrett. Her voice was weak but steady. We hold here. Harrison met her eyes, rain dripping from his brow. For the first time, he didn't see the logistics clerk, didn't see the invisible woman. He saw a soldier. And he nodded. We hold. How much fight can you carve out of a body already broken? Alexa Reyes lay half-propped against jagged stone, rain soaking her hair to her skin, blood seeping from the wound at her side. Pain radiated with every breath, sharp and unrelenting, but her hands refused to release the Barrett. The rifle was heavy now, heavier than it had ever been, but it was the only thing between her and the darkness pressing in. Around her, the SEALs formed a ragged perimeter. Davidson barked bursts of gunfire, his voice raw with curses. Thompson fought one-handed, his grazed arm pressed tight to his chest, teeth gritted as he reloaded with the other. Harrison crouched beside Alexa, his rifle spitting controlled fire down the slope. The storm didn't stop, neither did the enemy. Shadows swarmed up the ridge, undeterred by the bodies already littering the rocks. Their voices carried in harsh cries, their boots pounding against wet stone. They weren't retreating anymore. They wanted blood. Reyes, Harrison shouted over the storm, "Can you shoot?" Her chest heaved. Her lips were pale, but she met his gaze with fire still alive in her eyes. Yes. He didn't doubt her again. She pressed her cheek to the wet stock, her vision blurred but focused enough to line up a shot. Her father's voice whispered through the ringing in her ears. Pain is just noise. Noise doesn't matter. Breath does. She breathed, fired. The Barrett cracked like thunder, its recoil jolting through her wounded side. The pain nearly made her black out. But when her scope cleared, another fighter had fallen, his body sliding down the rocks. Target down, Davidson shouted, disbelief edging his tone. Alexa's hands trembled, but she steadied them. Another round, another breath, another body fell. It didn't matter that her vision swam, or that every heartbeat sent fire through her ribs. She would not stop. Not while they were still standing. Not while she could still pull the trigger. The fight became relentless. Bullets hissed like angry wasps. Grenades shook the ridge. Mud slid beneath their boots, threatening to send them tumbling into the abyss. Harrison barked orders, keeping rhythm in chaos. Thompson cover left, Davidson push right, Reyes center line. For a moment it worked. For a moment they held. But moments don't last in war. A grenade detonated close, knocking Davidson off his feet, his helmet spinning away. He staggered back up, blood running down his temple but slower now. Thompson's one-armed fire grew weaker, his rifle jerking with pain. Harrison's ammo ran low. His belt was almost bare. Alexa knew it, felt it. The math was simple. The enemy had numbers. They did not. Her scope found a heavy machine gun being hauled into position below. If it set up, the ridge would be shredded in seconds. She exhaled, pulled the trigger. The gunner dropped. The weapon clattered useless into the mud. "Clear," Harrison shouted, relief breaking for a heartbeat before another squad surged from the shadows, shouting, firing, relentless. It didn't end. It would never end. For the first time that night, Alexa felt despair claw at her. Not fear, not doubt. Despair. Because she knew they couldn't hold forever. And that thought dragged her back to the memory that had haunted her since childhood, the day she learned her father had been killed. No glory, no medals, just silence. A folded flag, a name carved into stone. She remembered staring at the flag in her lap, thinking, he gave everything, and the world forgot anyway. Now, on the ridge, with blood soaking her uniform and thunder drowning her heartbeat, she felt the same truth coming for her. I'll die here, and they'll forget me too. Her vision blurred, her grip faltered. And then Harrison's hand pressed against her wound, firm and steady, grounding her. "You're not dying here," he growled. "Not tonight." His voice wasn't loud, it wasn't desperate, it was iron. And it cut through the despair like a blade. The enemy surged closer, less than 50 yards now. Davidson roared as he unloaded the last of his ammo, empty magazines littering the mud around him. Thompson switched to his sidearm, firing one-handed, every shot shaky but determined. Alexa forced her trembling hands to steady. She chambered her last round. "One left," she whispered. Harrison heard her. "Make it count." She searched through the scope, scanning the chaos. Fighters everywhere, shadows on shadows. Which one mattered most? Then she saw him, a man climbing with an RPG slung over his shoulder, shielded by 3 others. If he reached the ridge, one rocket would finish them all. Alexa exhaled. Her chest tightened, blood burning her lungs. She squeezed the trigger. The round tore through the first man, the second, the third, and the rocket carrier fell backward into the mud, weapon clattering uselessly beside him. Her scope went dark. The rifle slid from her hands. She had nothing left. "Out," Davidson shouted, his rifle dry. "Out," Thompson echoed, his pistol clicking empty. Harrison's weapon spat the last few rounds, then fell silent. For the first time, no shots answered the storm, only enemy fire, only approaching footsteps. They were out of ammo, out of time, out of options. Harrison gritted his teeth. His men stood beside him, battered, bleeding, weaponless. And Alexa slumped against the stone, pale, her eyes half-lidded but still burning with defiance. The storm pressed in. And Harrison knew the choice was upon him. Sacrifice or survival. Run and live a little longer, stay and die together. Neither felt right. Neither felt wrong. The enemy crested the ridge, shadows looming with rifles raised, shouting in triumph. Harrison stepped forward, arms out, ready to make the final stand with nothing but his fists. Davidson beside him, teeth bared. Thompson, wounded but unyielding. And Alexa, her eyes snapped open. Her hand reached for the radio Miller had given her. Her voice cracked through the storm, weak but steady, as she pressed the transmitter. Now, the mountain answered. Explosions ripped through the canyon, lighting the storm in orange fire. Hidden charges, placed weeks ago along supply lines, triggered in sequence. The ridge shook, the bridge trembled, fighters screamed as fire swallowed their advance. The trap they had set for the SEALs had turned on them. Alexa had known, she had planned. Miller's encrypted radio wasn't just backup, it was the detonator. The battlefield flipped in an instant. The storm wasn't theirs anymore. It was hers. The SEALs stared at her in shock as the enemy scattered, burning, retreating, broken. Harrison dropped to one knee beside her, gripping her shoulder. You had this the whole time. Her lips curved into the faintest, pained smile. Not the whole time, just long enough. Davidson let out a ragged laugh, shaking his head. And we thought she was just the coffee girl. The storm raged on, but the ridge was theirs. For now. Alexa slumped back, her strength gone, her body trembling. But inside, where despair had lived, something new settled. Not pride, not victory. Peace. Because for the first time, she wasn't her father's shadow. She was herself. And she had made the storm listen. What happens when the storm finally goes quiet? The explosions had stopped. The gunfire faded. Smoke curled upward from the canyon, thick and black, mixing with the storm until the night sky itself looked bruised. The ridge was littered with bodies and twisted metal, the earth still trembling from the detonations. Alexa Reyes lay slumped against the rock, her hand pressed weakly to her bleeding side, her breath shallow but steady. Around her, the SEALs stood in stunned silence, their weapons empty, their bodies bruised and bloodied, their ears ringing with the aftershock of survival. For a long moment no one moved, no one spoke. It wasn't victory, not really, it was survival, and survival always came at a cost. Commander Harrison scanned the ridge, his eyes sharp despite the exhaustion etched into his face. Davidson leaned against a boulder, blood streaking down his temple, muttering curses that no longer carried anger, only disbelief. Thompson sat with his back to the rocks, cradling his injured arm, staring out over the canyon as if trying to piece together how they were still alive. And Alexa? Harrison's gaze lingered on her the longest. She looked smaller than she had hours ago, her frame pale and trembling, her hair plastered to her skin. But there was nothing small about what she had done. She had held. She had saved them. And now she was slipping. Harrison crouched beside her, his voice low, steady. Reyes, stay with me. Her eyes flickered open, unfocused at first, then sharp. You made it out. We made it out because of you. She tried to laugh, but it came out as a pained exhale. Don't start sounding like Davidson. Davidson smirked from where he sat, shaking his head. Hell, I'll say it plain, I was wrong. You're not the coffee girl. You're the reason we're breathing. For once his voice carried no mockery, only truth. Alexa's lips twitched into the faintest smile before she winced, her hand pressing tighter against her wound. The rain began to ease, turning from a downpour into a cold, steady drizzle. The silence of the mountains pressed in, broken only by the distant crackle of fire below. Harrison checked his watch. Dawn wasn't far, they had to move. Status, he ordered. Davis is stable, Thompson reported, his voice quiet. Still unconscious, but he'll make it if we can evac him soon. Ammo. Davidson gave a bitter laugh. Don't bother asking. Harrison nodded grimly. Then we move light, no noise. We put distance between us and this canyon before they regroup. He turned to Alexa. She looked too weak to stand, too pale to keep moving. But her eyes burned. I can walk, she said. You can't. I will. Harrison almost argued, but he saw the set of her jaw, the same unyielding resolve that had carried her through hours of hell. And he realized that forcing her to stay behind would kill her faster than the wound. He nodded once. "Davidson, give her a shoulder." Davidson stepped forward without hesitation, looping her arm over his. "Don't slow me down, Reyes." She smirked faintly. "Try to keep up." For the first time, Davidson didn't laugh at her. He laughed with her. They moved slow, cautious, weaving through jagged rocks and slick trails. Every sound made them freeze, every shadow drew their rifles, but no ambush came, no enemy pursuit. The storm had broken more than bones and stone. It had broken the will of the fighters who had thought the bridge was theirs. Now it was just silence, the kind of silence that only comes after too much death. Hours passed before they found shelter, a shallow cave halfway down a slope, shielded from the wind. Harrison posted Thompson at the entrance, Davidson tending to Davis's bandaged shoulder, while he knelt beside Alexa. She sat propped against the cave wall, her face pale, her hands shaking as she tried to clean her wound. "Let me," Harrison said, gently taking the kit from her. She didn't argue, too tired to fight, too human to hide it. As he worked, silence stretched between them. Finally, Alexa spoke. "You think they'll tell this story?" Harrison glanced at her. "What do you mean?" She winced as he pressed gauze to her side, but her voice stayed steady. "Back home, command. Do you think they'll write it down? The woman who saved the seals?" Harrison paused, the question heavier than the cave itself. He thought of all the missions erased by politics, the names buried in classified files, the truths no one wanted to acknowledge. "No," he said finally, "they won't." Her eyes closed. "Figures." "But," he added, his voice low but certain, "we'll tell it. Every man here, every man who lives because of you. Your name will be carried whether they want it or not." Her eyes opened again, searching his face for lies. She found none. "Sometimes," Harrison murmured, finishing the bandage, "dignity doesn't need a record. It just acts." She swallowed hard, looking away, her throat tight with something she couldn't name. The cave was quiet, the kind of quiet that magnified every small sound, the drip of water, the slow breaths of men too exhausted to sleep, the faint crackle of a dying fire outside. Alexa sat awake, watching the storm fade through the cave mouth. Her body ached, her wound throbbed, her heart felt heavy. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. They had seen her, really seen her. And though she knew the world might forget, though she knew command might bury this night under reports and silence, she carried one truth that no one could take. She mattered. Not as Miguel Reyes' daughter, not as the invisible logistics clerk, as herself. And that truth was enough to keep her breathing through the night. At dawn, the rain stopped. The world outside the cave was washed clean, the mountains sharp against the rising light. The seals stirred, stiff and bruised but alive. Davidson stretched, grimacing. "Can't believe I'm saying this, but I'll take another day just to be ignored in the chow hall." Thompson smirked faintly. "You won't be ignored anymore." Davidson glanced at Alexa, who was watching the sunrise with tired eyes. His smirk faded into something softer, quieter. "Yeah," he said, "guess not." They left the cave in silence, the sun breaking over the horizon. Every step was heavy, every breath cost effort, but the air tasted different now, not of smoke, not of fear. Of survival. And survival, Alexa realized, was not just about living. It was about what you carried out of the fire. She carried scars, she carried ghosts. But she also carried dignity. And that was enough. For now, what happens after the battle, when the gunfire stops, but the silence is louder than war? The convoy rolled back into forward operating base horizon 3 days later, battered and limping. The SEALs were gaunt from exhaustion, their uniforms torn, their faces streaked with dirt and bandages. One was carried on a stretcher. All were changed. No cheers greeted them. No flags. Just the low hum of generators, the smell of diesel and dust, and the usual drone of daily routine. War never paused to notice its survivors. But the men carried something invisible, something heavier than their rucksacks, deeper than their wounds. A memory burned into them that command could never erase. Alexa Reyes walked in their shadow, her side still wrapped in blood-stained bandages, her gait stiff, her frame thinner from blood loss and sleepless nights. She wore no medals, no ribbons, no combat insignia, just the same nameless fatigue she had worn the day she was dismissed as nothing more than the supply clerk. And yet, every man who had crossed the bridge with her knew. Without her, they would have been ghosts. Inside the command tent, the briefing was clinical, reports filed, losses counted, enemy strength adjusted in thick red ink. The words intelligence failure appeared twice, underlined once. Commander Harrison stood stiff, his voice steady as he delivered the facts. He did not embellish, he did not dramatize, but he did not omit. When he spoke Alexa's name, the room shifted. Some officers frowned, some looked confused, others skeptical. She acted without authorization, one colonel said flatly, broke chain of command, compromised operational integrity. She saved 8 men, Harrison answered, voice tight with controlled anger. That is not the point. It's exactly the point. Harrison's eyes locked on the colonel, unflinching. You buried her behind a desk. You ignored her, you dismissed her, and she still risked her life for us, for me, for this country. If that's not the point, then I don't know what is. The colonel's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. Harrison signed the report, his signature sharp and deliberate. Then he left the tent without another word. Outside, Alexa sat on a bench near the medical tent, sipping from a tin cup of lukewarm coffee. The sun was bright, too bright after days of storm. She looked down at her hands. They still trembled faintly. She flexed her fingers, half expecting to feel the rifle's weight again. But there was nothing, just scars already forming on her palms where stone and recoil had torn skin raw. She didn't notice Harrison until he sat down beside her. You should be resting, he said. She smirked faintly. You should be writing your report. Already did. Silence stretched between them, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but full of words unsaid, of things both of them carried but didn't know how to release. Finally, Alexa broke it. What did they say? Harrison exhaled through his nose, staring at the dust at his boots. They'll bury it. They'll call it a successful mission with unexpected resistance. They'll say the SEALs adapted under pressure. They'll erase your name. Her jaw clenched, but she didn't look surprised. I figured. Harrison turned to her, his voice low but firm. But not to us, not to the men who were there. Davidson, Thompson, Davis, me. We'll never forget who got us out. And no matter what the paper says, that truth is written in us now. Her eyes flickered, searching his face for the lie she expected, but there wasn't one. And for the first time, she let herself believe him. That night the SEALs sat together at the long mess hall table, plates half empty, voices low, laughter rough and tired. The usual noise of bravado was gone, replaced by something quieter, heavier. Davidson leaned back, rubbing the scar on his temple, and muttered, Crazy thing is, I thought she couldn't read a map. Thompson smirked. Turns out she read all of us better than we read her. Laughter rippled around the table, not sharp, not mocking, gentle, real. At the far end, Alexa sat with her tray, silent as always. But when she glanced up, she caught their eyes. And this time, no one looked away. Weeks passed. The wound on her side closed into a scar. The bruises faded. But something in Alexa stayed changed. She still inventoried crates, still logged supplies, still walked the base with quiet precision. But now, when men passed her, they nodded. Some even stopped to say her name. Not everyone, not most, but enough. And though command still listed her as logistics, though her uniform still bore no combat patch, Alexa carried something deeper. She carried the knowledge that when the storm came, when the bridge became a grave, when the SEALs had no way out, it was her shot that split the night. Her breath, her choice. Her dignity. One evening, Miller found her at the edge of the airstrip, watching the sunset. "You proved your father right," he said, voice rough with pride. Alexa didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the horizon. "I didn't do it for him." "No," Miller said softly. "You did it for you, that's the difference." She turned then just slightly, meeting his gaze. And in her eyes he saw it. Not the shadow of Miguel Reyes, not the invisible clerk of Horizon, but a soldier who had carved her place into the silence. War doesn't remember everyone. Some names get lost, some stories erased, some acts never written down. But the truth doesn't vanish just because no one records it. The truth lives in the men who breathe, because one woman refused to be invisible. The truth lives in the silence between thunder and shot, in the pause where dignity speaks not in words but in action. And the truth is this. On a storm-soaked bridge in the middle of nowhere, when 8 SEALs had no way out, it wasn't firepower or command that saved them. It was her, Alexa Reyes, the one no one noticed, the one no one believed in, the one who carried dignity not as a badge, but as a choice. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.